Welcome to Tentative Title with Tim. This is a podcast about creativity, about process, about filmmaking, and about screenwriting. Welcome, everybody, back to the podcast. I hope everything has been good for everybody out there. And today's topic, I wanted to talk about the structure of a screenplay and how the things that you set up in the first act, you should be paying off in the third act. A lot of people know this as Chekhov's gun. The reason why was because Anton Chekhov, I think that was his first name. He was a playwright, a Russian playwright, and I'm not sure if it was something that he actually said. I should probably look this up, or if it was something that he had applied to one of his scripts. But the main point was, if you present a gun in Act 1, then that means that gun has to go off at some point in Act 3. And the whole idea behind that was that you're setting up the structure of your story by showing the audience things that are going to be important down the line. And I think that's why I gravitate more towards mysteries, because in a mystery, they usually show a crime happening. Some event is happening out of context. Usually you don't know all the people involved. You don't know if there are people who have seen what has taken place. And over the course of the film, or over the course of the series, you begin to get more information about what actually happened. And I love that, because in a mystery, there's a guarantee that you're going to find out who did it in the end. And this can apply to police procedurals on television, but for the most part, like when it comes to the format of cinema, watching a mystery always gives me a sense of there's going to be something exciting that's happening, and I'm going to gradually find out why it happened and who was responsible. And there's kind of this sense of everything will be wrapped up by the end, and it's not going to be something that you're going to find out all the information, but you may not feel great about it by the end. It's not going to be like putting a bow on everybody's lives. Like a character has started out, murdered at the beginning, and we find out who did it by the end. And it's all about the journey of getting to that answer. And I want to bring this up because, especially with television being so prominent now, like there's so much great television out there. But I think there came a point where showrunners thought that they could present information without having it pay off down the line. And I want to say it's a lot easier to present a lot of things that can be paid off in television down the line, and you can have cycles of introducing something in the first episode and then paying it off by the end of the season, while still having a bigger story out there, a bigger question that needs to be answered over the course of the entire series. And so there is that way of writing a show that can be very satisfactory to the audience. At least being able to like answer questions while you're going along to find out the big answer to the big question is it can be very gratifying, and is fairly difficult, I'm sure, for a lot of showrunners to pull off, especially if they're relying on a studio to look at the ratings, and if a show is very popular, seasons might get added on where there was no need for seasons to be added on, and so they had to stretch out the story and maybe present some things, like setting up some things that they weren't able to pay off when it came to the final episode. But other than that, if you're writing something, let's just kind of bring it back to film. If you are writing a film, you're going to be setting up something at the beginning with the intent of paying it off by the end. And it can be extremely hard to want to follow that rule. This coming from somebody who loves to kind of flip things on their head. I like to kind of play with the expectation of the audience, but I've also learned that that's not always a great thing to do with everything that I write. Like there is a need for structure. There is a need for following the rules, because your audience will be more happy with what you create if you do that. So in saying that, what can you set up at the beginning, to pay off? Like, I brought up the idea of a mystery. Like you can have some crime happen, some murder, and then you figure out what actually happened by the end. You can set up just small things like a quirk of a character, of your main character, who at the beginning, maybe it's seen as something negative, but when you get to the third act, it turns out that trait that they had actually is the only thing that's going to solve the problem that they've gotten themselves into at the end, or they have some ability or some knowledge that is going to come in handy at the end that is going to pay off. I love using those character traits, those things that seem very insignificant at the beginning, and then when you get to the third act, you see that actually the reason why you showed that character struggling with something was because they needed that flaw in order to actually win the day in the end. So with that, you can have character traits, you can have props. Like I was saying, if you present a gun in Act 1, it should go off in Act 3. That's the standard rule. You can pretty much set up almost anything to pay off by the end. And I don't want to say like it's like a combination of really big things, and it can be like very small things as well. Like I said, a character trait that seems insignificant, or a prop that the character at the beginning uses or is trying to find. Like let's say they lost like their keys, and by the end of the movie, let's say the keys show up that is gonna unlock something, a bank vault or whatever that they really needed, because of I'm just kind of like going off of the top of my head, but just having things that you can having those tools that you can later take advantage of later down the line in your script. And what's fun about this whole thing is that it may seem like it's limiting, but it's actually a lot of fun. Like, as I'm writing my first draft of a script, sometimes I'm going off of a treatment. Treatments are a lot easier to kind of work out the story, but the fun of writing a story is not in the treatment. In fact, I despise that part of the process, and I really only use that when I'm collaborating with other people. But when it comes to writing something for myself, or writing something that I intend to produce myself, I usually kind of forgo the treatment a bit, or I might, write some of it, but not really get so deep to the point where I'm like writing draft after draft of my treatment in order to kind of zero in on the on what the story is, because sometimes I know what the story is, and I just need to let the my intuition, let my instincts kind of guide me through the story, because I find that when I'm writing, like, I'm peeking off to the side to see what page I'm on, and that kind of like gives me a sign, that I need something to kind of happen, but it's not like it's not a stringent rule that I have. It's just something that's instinctual, that as I'm writing, I'm like, okay, I'm coming up on page 30. What have I set up at the beginning that I can start to, unfold some more that will, lead me into Act 2? What's some big thing that I can have happen that is organic to what's to, and still gonna lead me to where I want this story to end up anyway. And I'll kind of, as I'm writing, those things will start to reveal themselves. But it's the same thing with the payoffs as well. Like, as I'm writing, and so sometimes it may not happen in the first draft. Like, as I'm writing the first draft, I'll kind of get to the end, and I'm like, well, I followed where I wanted to go with the story, but now that I'm looking back at it, I can connect some things. A character did something in Act 1 that I can now connect to Act 3, and I can make it tighter, so to speak. And that's really fun to do, because then you start to build things onto your characters at the beginning that that you want to pay off at the end. And having that in the back of your mind as you're writing is so much fun, because then, even though the characters might be kind of quirky, or they might have something that is just odd, it's really fun to write those things, because like you can that it's leading somewhere. It's not random, and that is a really frustrating part of some film and television that I write, is that they are quirky for the sake of being quirky. Like, there's nothing about, like, if you took this weird character and just made them normal, it wouldn't matter, because like there's nothing about them being weird that actually adds to the story, and it doesn't pay off anywhere. It's just there because they want to have a weird character, or they want to check off a box or something. It's just it makes no sense, because narratively, like, even though you want to have a character that's interesting and quirky, build that into what happens in the story. Like, make that part of the solution of the wrap up of whatever, by the end. Don't just throw it in there because you're like, oh, I have this quirky character, look how quirky he is, like, and it's like, no, just like make that character, like, if you pluck that character out of the story would kind of like fall apart, because they are part of those building blocks of that particular story. And it's the same thing with like what you set up at the beginning. It's like you're building this house, so to speak. You're laying out the foundation, and by the time you get to completing it, like, it should narratively be cohesive. And but I'm starting to lean into this a lot more, and it can be very tempting, especially at the beginning, to think that your story's gonna be boring. That you're like, yeah, so I set up this thing at the beginning, and it pays off at the end, and the audience is gonna see it coming, like, they're gonna see it a mile away, and blah blah. And okay, to be fair, there are some movies where you're watching it and you're like, I could basically walk out of the room and come back and know exactly like what's going to happen in Act 3, because like it's just so obvious what is going to happen. But that's where the fun in mixing things up in Act Two and making it and making the choices of the characters make the audience doubt that they know where it's going to go. But they also have confidence, or they should have confidence, that there is something about what they saw in the beginning that's going to come back around. And I have to admit, like, I'm still working on how to do that effectively. But once I leaned into it and stopped being kind of like I thought that it was like it was some kind of like crutch that people who just are looking for a quick way to write a movie, like, they just go by the structure, and it's like, oh well, that's boring, like, why are you going to go by the structure when you could have so much more fun not going by the structure, and by setting things up that maybe don't pay off at the end. Like, well, what about that? And it kind of goes back to the of the episodes that I talked about when it comes to, like, audience. Like, the general audience doesn't want you to like play with their emotions. Like, they want to have a film that they can walk into and then have a good time, feel like things were wrapped up in one way or another, and then go about their day. And then there's another audience, which is like filmmakers and fellow artists who love the fact that, like, their expectations are subverted, because we see a lot of content and we get bored easily. And so when we see something that is, like, out of the ordinary and weird and totally goes against the grain, like, we're really excited about it, because we're like, whoa, you're, like, breaking out, you're taking the structure and you're destroying it. Like, oh, this is amazing, this is, like, breaking, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, those films need to be made, and those films are for a particular audience, but those films are not going to be as mainstream as we would like them to be, because as much as it may challenge our perceptions and our makes us think and challenges us as audience, as an audience, it's not going to be for everybody. Like, there are people who are perfectly content with the cookie cutter action movie or whatever, cookie cutter drama, cookie cutter comedy, and they're fine with that. Like, they're not expecting to be challenged in any way, and that's fine. They're just looking to kind of disengage from the world for a couple hours and kind of forget about their life for a little bit and have a good time, and that there's a need for those films as well. So let's see, where am I going here? So the next time you're working on something, if you're starting out, it's a good tool to think about when you're developing your story. And one thing that I forget where the quote came from, but it was basically, you have to know the rules in order to break them. And it took me a long time to really accept that, because I always wanted to be the one who, upended the rules in terms of, like, structure, and I kind of wanted to do my own thing, and the typical attitude of being an artist. But those rules are important. They're a good guideline, at least at the beginning, and as you get more comfortable with it, you can break those rules. Like, there's nobody standing over your shoulder saying you have to follow this. But there is proof that some rules are gratifying to the audience, and we want people to, click on our movies and our TV shows, and to pay to see our stuff. And if they are constantly disappointed in the storytelling, then they're going to be less likely to want to pay to watch anything anymore, and they'll just say, well, what's the point? Like, I'm gonna end up loving a character and they're gonna kill it off because that's subverting my expectations, or stuff like that. So, but if I'm talking to somebody who's like, has a lot of scripts under their belt, like I want to hear your opinion on this. Like, do you stick to that rule? Have you just like heard about that rule and you're like, yeah, I don't need it, and I've been pretty successful without it, so yeah, I'm not gonna pay off things that I set up, because that's just not the kind of artist that I am. That's not the filmmaker I am. That's not the writer I am. I don't make that kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, like, I want to hear about somebody who always uses that. Like, do you always like pay things off? Like, is there a pretty little bow at the end of all of your films and all of your scripts? So anyway, guys, that's all I got for today, and I hope everybody is doing well, and thank you for the support. Thank you for listening. I hope I'm bringing things to you that either you're able to think about, or things you've never heard of before, or just a point of view that you find interesting, and like bring some light to your week while we're still here in this pandemic. Anyway, guys, so like usual, wear the mask, wash your hands, social distance, all that kind of stuff. We got some vaccines out there that are being distributed, and it'll take some time, but eventually we'll look back at 2020 and 2021 and say, wow, man, what a crazy time that was, and I'm glad that we're beyond that now. So anyway, guys, talk to you next week. And also, if you want to connect with me, I have a email for the podcast. It's tentative.title.with.tim.podcast@gmail.com. Also, I have a Twitter account for the podcast where I post episodes, and that is @title_Tim. And you can find also on the Facebook page, I have a page for the podcast, so you can connect with me there. Looking forward to hearing from all of you, and until then, I'll catch you on the next one.